Thomas Reeve arrived at George and Linda's doorstep with a Father's Day gift wrapped in bright paper, and by morning, George, Linda, and their daughter Emily were dead, their family home reduced to smoldering ash as neighbors watched in horror, never suspecting the smiling son-in-law was the architect of a plan so cold it would shock an entire community. Thomas Reeve parked his car a few houses down from the modest beige house on Maple Street, gripping the steering wheel until his knuckles turned pale. The Father's Day gift on the passenger seat was wrapped in cheerful paper with blue stripes, and the bright red ribbon tied on top looked almost too festive under the streetlight's glow. A soft summer breeze rustled the leaves as he stepped out, forcing a polite smile as a neighbor watering her garden waved at him. Nobody could see the tightness in his jaw, the sleepless nights reflected in his tired eyes, or the fear building under his calm exterior. Thomas had always been considered a decent man, quiet but helpful, the kind of son-in-law who helped fix leaking pipes or raked leaves for George when the old man's knees gave him trouble. But beneath that layer of normalcy was a man drowning in the weight of gambling debts that seemed to grow no matter how many paychecks he handed over to shadowy collectors, debts that came with quiet threats whispered outside his workplace. When he was alone, he approached the house, pausing for a moment on the walkway to collect himself, looking at the neat flower beds that Linda maintained with care, and the small welcome sign on the porch that Emily painted years ago as a teenager. Each step up the porch felt heavier, each breath in the warm summer air tighter, as if the universe itself was reminding him of what he was about to do. When George opened the door with his usual warm grin, Thomas handed him the gift and pretended to be embarrassed by its early arrival, muttering something about wanting him to have it first thing in the morning. George's laughter echoed in the front hallway, and Thomas forced himself to match the sound, though it felt hollow in his chest. He stepped inside, the familiar smell of the house washing over him, a mixture of fresh laundry, coffee grounds, and the faint scent of Linda's rose-scented candles. Dinner was simple that night, the kind of meal that looked unremarkable but felt warm, with family, plates of roast chicken and potatoes, fresh rolls, and sweet tea that Linda poured for everyone as she told stories about their neighbors. Emily, tired from work, leaned against Thomas's shoulder briefly, whispering about how she couldn't wait to move into their own place soon. Thomas nodded, but his mind was elsewhere, drifting toward the future he had planned, a future where debts would disappear, and insurance money would pave a path out of the constant fear that shadowed him. Every laugh around the table felt like an echo in a room he was already leaving behind, and the taste of the food barely registered as he chewed in silence, glancing at the gift box that now sat on the kitchen counter, waiting. After dinner, they all sat on the back porch, George sipping on his decaf coffee, Linda folding laundry from a basket, and Emily scrolling through her phone while leaning on Thomas's side. Fireflies began to flicker in the growing darkness, and neighbors could see their silhouettes through the screen door, looking like a family sharing a peaceful moment at the end of a long day. But in Thomas's mind, the clock was ticking down toward dawn, and the small metal device hidden within the carefully wrapped box was like a heartbeat, pulsing louder each time he glanced at it through the kitchen window. When they finally went inside to prepare for bed, Thomas offered to clean the dishes, standing quietly at the sink with soapy water swirling around plates as he replayed his plan in his head. That night, as the family settled into the comfortable familiarity of their home, Thomas sat alone in the dark living room, staring at the box that would change everything by morning. The refrigerator hummed softly, the house creaked as it settled, and somewhere outside, a dog barked at a passing car. Thomas felt the weight of the moment, the certainty that there was no turning back, and as he closed his eyes, the warmth of the house around him felt like a distant memory of a life that could have been, a life that would vanish with the dawn, leaving nothing but smoke and ashes in its wake. The darkness inside the house felt heavier than the night outside, as Thomas paced slowly near the kitchen, careful not to wake anyone. The glow of the streetlight seeped through the curtains, casting pale lines across the floor where dust floated. In the stale air, the gift box on the counter stood quietly, its cheerful wrapping almost mocking him with its bright colors in the gloom of the silent house. Inside that box was the device Thomas had built with trembling hands in the weeks leading up to Father's Day, its wires carefully connected to a small ignition system, the timing mechanism hidden beneath layers of foam and cardboard so that it would not rattle if George picked it up. Thomas had practiced assembling it in the small garage he rented across town, sweating in the heat, telling himself it was the only way out, that once it was over, he would finally be free from the collectors who waited outside his job or left voicemails reminding him how much he owed. The fear of what he was about to do gripped him as he stood there, listening to the soft ticking of the old clock in the hallway, each tick a reminder that dawn was approaching. He moved closer to the box, checking the tape on the sides, ensuring the wires inside remained connected and that the battery pack was still intact. His fingers shook as he adjusted a corner of the ribbon that had come loose, pressing it down gently, pretending it was just another Father's Day gift, pretending that tomorrow would be like any other Sunday where they would sit around the table drinking coffee and eating toast. But Thomas knew that tomorrow there would be no breakfast, no coffee, only the sound of fire tearing through the walls, consuming the curtains, the photographs on the shelves, the memories trapped in the frames, leaving only blackened fragments of what once was a family home. He glanced down the hallway where the soft glow from the nightlight in the bathroom lit part of the floor, leading toward the bedrooms where George, Linda, and Emily were asleep, unaware of the danger, waiting for them. Thomas felt a pang of guilt so sharp, it nearly made him step back and rip open the box, to dismantle the device, to throw it away and run, to confess everything and beg for help, to tell Emily that he was sorry for the secrets he had kept. But the debts were too heavy, and the faceless voices that threatened him promised consequences if he failed to pay, consequences he could not bear to risk. The promise of the insurance payout whispered to him like a lifeline, a promise of clearing everything, of starting over, of leaving behind the weight that pressed on his chest every time the phone rang with an unknown number. Thomas sat on the floor, leaning against the wall across from the kitchen, pulling his knees to his chest as he stared at the box, watching the shadows shift around it with the passing cars outside. The hum of the refrigerator and the occasional creak of the house settling were the only sounds that filled the space, the kind of quiet that was thick enough to press against his eardrums. He checked the time on his phone repeatedly, watching the minutes slip by, each one taking him closer to the moment when the box would do what it was designed to do. His mind drifted to Emily's smile earlier that evening, the way she had looked at him with tired but trusting eyes as they cleared the dishes, thanking him for helping, thanking him for being there, unaware that this was the last night they would share under the same roof. The guilt did not leave, but it became numb as Thomas forced himself to think of the future, of how everything would be solved, how he would be free. He imagined himself sitting in a new apartment, debts paid off, starting over in a different city, telling himself it was worth it, that it was necessary. As the hours passed and the darkness shifted toward the pale gray of approaching dawn, Thomas finally stood, stretching his stiff legs, and took one last look at the wrapped box sitting quietly on the counter. The house was still, and the air felt heavy, as if holding its breath for what was to come. Thomas turned away, walking down the hall to the guest room, leaving the gift behind in the silence, waiting for the morning to come, and with it, the flames that would swallow everything he could not fix. Smoke began to curl under the kitchen door as the morning light crept through the blinds, unnoticed in the quiet of the house. The device inside the gift box triggered exactly as Thomas had planned, a small spark igniting the accelerant-soaked cotton hidden beneath layers of foam and colored paper. At first, the fire was no more than a flicker, a small glow that cracked the stillness, sending wisps of gray smoke into the air. It touched the curtains, then the edge of a paper towel roll on the counter, feeding on the dry fabric until the flames began to grow, crackling softly as they climbed higher, consuming the bright wrapping paper that had hidden the disaster inside. The kitchen, which had been filled with the scent of coffee and toast on so many mornings, now filled with the dark, bitter stench of burning plastic and wood. George was the first to notice something was wrong, waking up to the sharp, bitter smell that reached him even through the closed bedroom door. He tried to call out for Linda, but his voice caught in the smoke, and when he opened the door, a wave of black heat hit him in the face, making him stagger back. The smoke was thick, rolling down the hallway like a dark river, curling along the ceiling as the fire spread across the linoleum floors, crawling toward the living room, the flames licking at the photographs on the walls, curling their edges into black flakes that floated in the growing heat. Linda tried to follow George, but the smoke made it impossible to see, and she fell to her knees, crawling blindly as the oxygen around her disappeared, replaced by thick, choking heat that burned her lungs with every breath. Emily was trapped in the hallway, caught between the bedroom and the stairs, disoriented by the darkness that was made worse by the smoke. The fire alarms screamed into the chaos, their shrill beeping drowned under the crackling roar of the flames that began to consume the furniture, the cabinets, the thin wooden doors that offered no protection. She reached for the railing, but the heat was unbearable, forcing her to pull her hand back as she tried to find her way through the black haze, coughing, eyes burning, tears streaming down her cheeks as she gasped for breath that was no longer there. The floor was hot beneath her bare feet, the air shimmering as the fire devoured the dry wood, climbing the walls, cracking the paint, exploding glass as the windows finally gave in to the pressure of the heat. Outside, the first neighbor noticed the thick black smoke rising from the house, twisting into the clear morning sky in a dark, ominous column that signaled disaster. Calls to emergency services came in as neighbors ran from their homes in pajamas and slippers, standing on lawns, watching helplessly as the flames broke through the windows, turning them into glowing holes that spat fire and smoke into the air. The sound of sirens echoed in the distance, growing closer as firefighters prepared themselves for the scene, pulling hoses from the trucks as they ran toward the burning home. But the fire had grown too quickly, fed by the accelerant Thomas had used, spreading through the open floor plan of the house with frightening speed, turning the home into a furnace from which there was no escape. Inside, the smoke was so thick that it was impossible to see the flames that consumed everything in their path, turning family photographs into ash, burning away the furniture, the clothes, the books, and the memories of the people who once filled the home with life. By the time firefighters managed to break down the front door, the flames were already eating through the ceiling, collapsing parts of the roof and fiery showers of debris that rained down into the living room. Water from the hoses hissed against the heat, turning to steam as it met the fire, creating clouds that mixed with the black smoke, making the air thick and suffocating. The family never made it out, their final moments, lost in the chaos of fire and smoke, the quiet of a Father's Day morning shattered by the roar of flames that consumed everything in their path, leaving behind nothing but blackened walls and ash as the sun rose higher in the sky. The charred remains of the house stood as a silent accusation, the air still heavy with the scent of burned wood and melted plastic. Days after the fire had been extinguished, investigators picked through the blackened rubble, boots crunching over ashes that once were pieces of furniture, family photos, and children's drawings stuck on the refrigerator. The kitchen, where the fire had started, was nothing more than a scorched hollow, the walls peeled back to reveal blackened studs, and wires dangling like veins. Among the ashes, they found twisted metal fragments that didn't belong to the kitchen appliances, small pieces of a device melted but still identifiable to a trained eye, wires fused together, a battery pack barely recognizable but present. The cause of the fire quickly shifted from accident to suspicion, and the once simple narrative of a tragic Father's Day fire began to crumble under the scrutiny of experienced investigators. Insurance companies flagged the incident immediately. Emily's recent life insurance policy, taken out only months before the fire and naming Thomas as the sole beneficiary, caught the attention of the adjusters, who quietly passed the information to local detectives. They began pulling Thomas's financial records, discovering a pattern of large cash withdrawals and missed payments, debts owed to individuals who were not tied to any bank, but who left Thomas frantic voicemails demanding payment. Credit card purchases revealed receipts for batteries, wires, and accelerants, items that on their own could be explained away, but collectively painted a picture of preparation, not coincidence. Thomas's digital footprint was examined, and search history showing instructions on ignition devices and timing mechanisms was quietly documented by detectives who understood how to follow the quiet trail a person leaves behind when planning something they think no one will discover. Thomas tried to maintain the image of a grieving husband and son-in-law, attending a community vigil, standing with his head lowered as neighbors wept, murmuring their condolences. He kept his words few, citing the shock of loss, and wore the same black jacket to each appearance, the fabric holding the scent of smoke that he insisted he could not wash away. Neighbors described how he appeared distant, but many assumed it was the shock of losing an entire family at once, the grief that would haunt any man. But detectives watching him noted how Thomas never asked about the cause of the fire, never pushed for answers, never once spoke about rebuilding or recovering anything from the wreckage. His eyes were often vacant, not with grief, but with calculation, darting toward the investigators on site, lingering as they examined the debris, as if waiting to see if they would find what he hoped would remain hidden. As the investigation progressed, pieces of the device were reconstructed by forensic specialists, the parts matching precisely with the purchases made on Thomas's accounts, and residue of accelerants found in the kitchen linked directly to the chemicals he had bought under his name. Witness statements describing Thomas arriving with the gift box the night before became crucial. The cheerful wrapping paper found partially burned near the ignition point, confirming its location. The pieces of the puzzle fit together quietly, but perfectly, each one revealing the truth of what Thomas had planned under the guise of a Father's Day gift. The narrative that he had tried to build, that of an unfortunate tragedy, could no longer stand against the weight of the evidence being collected piece by piece in the cold, methodical hands of the investigators determined to uncover what happened in the early hours of that summer morning. The community that once felt sorrow began to feel anger as whispers of Thomas's involvement spread, the story shifting from pity for a man who had lost his family to horror at the possibility that he was the architect of the tragedy. The burned shell of the house became a place people crossed the street to avoid, a reminder of betrayal, of a family destroyed not by fate, but by the hands of someone they had trusted. The case that had once seemed like a closed chapter of loss was now alive with tension, and all eyes turned to Thomas as detectives prepared to move forward, building their case quietly, waiting for the moment when they would knock on his door, ending the facade that he thought would save him from the consequences of what he had done. Thomas barely noticed how the days turned into weeks after the fire. He drifted from one place to another, staying in motels under his own name, spending small amounts of cash withdrawn from what little he had left, always checking over his shoulder, half expecting a tap on the shoulder that never came. He told anyone who asked that he needed time away to grieve, to process, to be alone with his thoughts. But his mind was never quiet. Each night, he lay awake, replaying the fire in his head, seeing the smoke curl up the walls, hearing the fire alarms he knew wouldn't save anyone. He told himself it had been necessary, that debts don't forgive themselves, that fear had left him no choice. In quiet moments, he almost believed it, but the nights were long, and the guilt crawled back through the cracks when he was alone. In the dark, detectives had been watching him long before Thomas noticed the same unfamiliar car parked near the diner where he took his meals. He caught glimpses of men he did not know browsing the same gas station aisles, pretending to read the back of candy bars while keeping him in their periphery. He knew it was coming, but kept telling himself there was no proof strong enough to stick. He clung to the idea that he could slip away, maybe vanish somewhere new, start fresh once the insurance money cleared. But the payout was frozen within days of the fire, flagged by the insurance investigators, who had seen too many tragedies turn out not to be accidents. Thomas tried to reach out to old friends, seeking loans or a couch to sleep on, but most avoided him, whispering behind closed doors that something about his story didn't feel right. The arrest came on a rainy morning as Thomas stepped out of a small-town cafe, coffee still warm in his hand, steam rising into the drizzle. He didn't struggle when they approached, didn't argue when they read the charges. The handcuffs felt cold against his wrists, heavier than he expected. At the station, the quiet pieces of evidence were laid out in folders and photos, credit card statements, security footage from the hardware store, the melted remains of the device, the insurance form signed in his careful handwriting. No single piece screamed murder, but together they formed a wall of truth he could not climb over. In court, the trial drew crowds of neighbors who had once invited him for barbecues, now sitting in the wooden benches, leaning forward as each new fact was read aloud in a voice that left no room for doubt. Witnesses testified about the cheerful gift box, the strange smell they'd once caught on his clothes, the sudden large life insurance policy that Thomas never mentioned to Emily's parents. Forensic specialists described the makeshift ignition device in simple, blunt terms. The jury listened in silence as the prosecution painted a picture of a man driven to desperation, not by love or loyalty, but by money owed to men who never forgot a debt. The verdict came swiftly: guilty on all counts. There was no dramatic outburst from Thomas, no tearful denial. He just sat there, shoulders slumped, staring at a spot on the wall behind the judge's bench, as if hoping to find a doorway there that would let him escape one final time. After the sentencing, the burned-out house was demolished. Nothing remained but an empty lot, marked by a single patch of scorched earth where the kitchen once stood. Neighbors still pause when they walk by, some crossing to the other side of the street without realizing it, uneasy at the memory of how a gift wrapped in bright paper turned a family gathering into a funeral. The story lived on, told in quiet conversations and local news specials. Each Father's Day a reminder that trust can be betrayed by those closest, that sometimes the worst danger is not the stranger at the door, but the familiar figure stepping inside with a smile and a gift in hand.